part 2 of a series of poetry events. Book number 2, The Reptile Room. And I'm going to read chapters 4 and 5. This is the picture for chapter 4. Chapter 4. One of the most difficult things to think about in life is one's regrets. Something will happen to you, and you will do the wrong thing, and for years afterwards you will wish you had done something different. For instance, sometimes when I am walking along the seashore, or visiting the grave of a friend, I will remember a day, a long time ago, when I didn't bring a flashlight with me to a place where I should have brought a flashlight, and the results were disastrous. Why didn't I bring a flashlight? I think to myself, even though it is too late to do anything about it. I should have brought a flashlight. For years after this moment in the lives of the Baudelaire orphans, Klaus thought of the time when he and his siblings realized that Stefano was actually Count Olaf, and was filled with great regret that he didn't call out to the driver of the taxicab who was beginning to drive back down the driveway, "Stop." Klaus would think to himself, even though it was too late to do anything about it, "Stop. Take this man away." Of course, it is perfectly understandable that Klaus and his sisters were too surprised to act quickly, but Klaus would lie awake in bed, years later, thinking that maybe, just maybe, if he had acted in time, he could have saved Uncle Monty's life. But he didn't. As the Baudelaire orphans stared at Count Olaf, the taxi drove back down the driveway, and the children were alone with their nemesis, a word which here means the worst enemy you could imagine. Count Olaf smiled at them, the way Uncle Monty's Mongolian mean snake would smile when a white mouse was placed in its cage each day for dinner. "Perhaps one of you might carry my suitcase into my room," he suggested in his wheezy voice. "The ride along that smelly road was dull and unpleasant, and I am very tired." "If anyone ever deserved to travel a long, lousy lane," Violet said, glaring at him, "it is you, Count Olaf. We will certainly not help you with your luggage, because we will not let you in this house." Olaf frowned at the orphans, and looked this way and that, as if he expected to see someone hiding behind the snake-shaped hedges. "Who is Count Olaf?" he asked quizzically. "My name is Stefano. I am here to assist Montgomery with his upcoming expedition to Peru. I assume you 3 are midgets who work as servants in the Montgomery home." "We are not midgets," Klaus said sternly. "We are children, and you are not Stefano. You are Count Olaf. You may have grown a beard and shaved your eyebrow, but you are still the same despicable person, and we will not let you in this house." "Futa!" Sonny shrieked, which probably meant something like, "I agree." Count Olaf looked at each of the Baudelaire orphans with his eyes shining brightly as if he were telling a joke. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, "but if I did, and I were this Count Olaf you speak of, I would think you are being very rude, and if I thought you were rude, I might get angry, and if I got angry, who knows what I might do." The children watched as Count Olaf raised his scrawny arms in a sort of shrug. It probably isn't necessary to remind you that just how violent he could be, but it certainly wasn't necessary at all to remind the Baudelaires. Klaus could still feel the bruise on his face from the time Count Olaf had struck him when they were living in his house. Sonny still ached from being stuffed in a bird cage and dangled from the tower where he made his evil plans, and Violet had not been the victim of any physical violence from this terrible man. She had almost been forced to marry him, and that was enough to make her pick up his suitcase and drag it slowly toward the door to the house. "Higher," Olaf said. "Lift it higher. I don't want it dragged along the ground like that." Klaus and Sonny hurried to help Violet with the suitcase, but even with the 3 of them carrying it, the weight made them stagger. It was misery enough that Count Olaf had reappeared in their lives, just when they were feeling so comfortable and safe with Uncle Monty, but to actually be helping this awful person enter their home was almost more than they could bear. Olaf followed closely behind them, and the 3 children could smell his stale breath as they brought the suitcase indoors and set it on the carpet beneath the painting of the entwined snakes. "Thank you, orphans," Olaf said, shutting the door behind him. "Now, Dr. Montgomery said my room would be waiting upstairs. I suppose I can carry my luggage from here. Now run along. We'll have lots of time to get to know one another later." "We already know you, Count Olaf," Violet said. "You obviously haven't changed a bit." You haven't changed either, Olaf said. It is clear to me, Violet, that you are as stubborn as ever. And Claus, you are still wearing those idiotic glasses from reading too many books. And I see this little Sunny here still has 9 toes instead of 10. But, Sunny shrieked, which probably meant something like, I do not. What are you talking about? Claus said impatiently. She has 10 toes, just like everybody else. Really? Olaf said. That's odd. I remember that she lost one of her toes in an accident. His eyes shone even brighter, as if they were telling a joke, and he reached in the pocket of his shabby coat and brought out a long knife, such as one might use for slicing bread. I seem to recall there was a man who was so confused by being called repeatedly by the wrong name that he accidentally dropped a knife on her little foot and severed one of her toes. Violet and Claus looked at Count Olaf, and then at the bare foot of their little sister. You wouldn't dare, Claus said. Let's not discuss what I would or would not dare to do, Olaf said. Let us discuss rather what I am to be called for as long as we are together in this house. We'll call you Stefano if you insist on threatening us, Violet said. But we won't be together in this house for long. Stefano opened his mouth to say something, but Violet was not interested in continuing the conversation. She turned on her heel and marched primely through the enormous door of the Reptile Room, followed by her siblings. If you or I had been there, we would have thought that the Baudelaire orphans weren't scared at all, speaking so bravely like that to Stefano and then simply walking away. But once the children reached the far end of the room, their true emotions showed clearly on their faces. The Baudelaires were terrified. Violet put her hands over her face and leaned against one of the reptile cages. Claus sank into a chair, trembling so hard that his feet rattled against the marble floor, and Sunny curled up into a little ball on the floor, so tiny that you might have missed her if you walked into the room. For several moments, none of the children spoke. Just listened to the muffled sounds of Stefano walking up the stairs and their own heartbeats pounding in their ears. How did he find us? Claus asked. His voice was a hoarse whisper, as if he had a sore throat. How did he get to be Uncle Monty's assistant? What is he doing here? He vowed that he'd get his hands on the Baudelaire fortune, Violet said, taking her hands away from her face and picking up Sunny, who was shivering. That was the last thing he said to me before he escaped. He said he'd get our fortune if it was the last thing he ever did. Violet shuddered, and did not add that he'd also said that once he got their fortune, he'd do away with all 3 of the Baudelaire siblings. She did not need to add it. Violet, Claus, and Sunny all knew that if he figured out a way to seize their fortune, he would slit the throats of the Baudelaire orphans as easily as you or I might eat a small butter cookie. What can we do? Claus asked. Monty won't be back for hours. Maybe we can call Mr. Poe, Violet said. It's the middle of business hours, but maybe he could leave the bank for an emergency. He wouldn't believe us, Claus said. Remember when we tried to tell him about Count Olaf when we lived there? He took such a long time to realize the truth. It was almost too late. I think we should run away. If we leave right now, we could probably get to town in time to catch a train far away from here. Violet pictured the 3 of them, all alone, walking along Lousy Lane beneath the sour apple trees, with the bitter smell of horseradish encircling them. Where would we go? She asked. Anywhere, Claus said. Anywhere but here. We could go far away where Count Olaf wouldn't find us, and change our names so no one would know who we were. We haven't any money, Violet pointed out. How could we live by ourselves? We could get jobs, Claus replied. I could work in a library, maybe, and you could work in some sort of mechanical factory. Sunny probably couldn't get a job at her age, but in a few years she could. The 3 orphans were quiet. They tried to picture leaving Uncle Monty and living by themselves, trying to find jobs and take care of each other. It was a very lonely prospect. The Baudelaire children sat in silence a while, and they were each thinking the same thing. They wished that their parents had never been killed in the fire, and that their parents had never been turned topsy-turvy the way they had. If only the Baudelaire's parents were still alive, the youngsters wouldn't even have heard of Count Olaf, let alone have him settling into their home and undoubtedly making evil plans. We can't leave, Violet said finally. Count Olaf found us once, and I'm sure he'd find us again, no matter how far we went. Plus, who knows where Count Olaf's assistants are? Perhaps they've surrounded the house right now, keeping watch in case we're on him. Claus shivered. He hadn't been thinking of Olaf's assistants, Besides scheming to get his hands on the Baudelaire fortune, Olaf was the leader of a terrible theater troupe, and his fellow actors were always ready to help him with his plans. They were a gruesome crew, each more terrifying than the next. There was a bald man with a long nose who always wore a black robe. There were two women who always had ghostly white powder on their faces. There was a person so large and blank-looking that you couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. And there was a skinny person with two hooks where his hand should have been. Violet was right. Any of these people could be lurking outside Uncle Monty's house, waiting to catch them if they had tried to escape. I think we should just wait for Uncle Monty to come back and tell him what has happened, Violet said. He'll believe us. If we tell him about the tattoo, he'll at least ask Stefano for an explanation. Violet's tone of voice when she said Stefano indicated her utter scorn for Olaf's disguise. Are you sure? Claus said. After all, Uncle Monty is the one who hired Stefano. Claus's tone of voice when he said Stefano indicated that he shared his sister's feelings. For we all know Uncle Monty and Stefano have planned something together. Mina, Sunny shrieked, which probably meant something like, don't be ridiculous, Claus. Violet shook her head. Sunny's right. I can't believe that Uncle Monty would be in cahoots with Olaf. He's been so kind and generous to us, and besides, if they were working together, Olaf wouldn't insist on using a different name. That's true, Claus said thoughtfully. So we wait for Uncle Monty. We wait, Violet agreed. To Joe, Sunny said solemnly, and the siblings looked at one another glumly. Waiting is one of life's hardships. It is hard enough to wait for chocolate cream pie while burnt roast beef is still on your plate. It is plenty difficult to wait for Halloween when the tedious month of September is still ahead of you. But to wait for one's adopted uncle to come home while a greedy and violent man is upstairs was one of the worst waits the Baudelaires had ever experienced. To get their mind off it, they tried to continue with their work, but the children were too anxious to get anything done. Violet tried to fix the hinged door on one of the traps, but all she could concentrate on was the knot of worry in her stomach. Claus tried to read about protecting oneself from thorny Peruvian plants, but thoughts of Stefano kept clouding his brain. And then he tried to bite the rope, but she had a cold chill of fear running through her teeth, and she soon gave up. She didn't even feel like playing with the incredibly deadly viper, so the Baudelaires spent the rest of the afternoon silently sitting in the Reptile Room, looking out the window for Uncle Monty's Jeep, and listening to the occasional noise from upstairs. They didn't even want to think about what Stefano might be unpacking. Finally, as the snake-shaped hedges began to cast long, skinny shadows in the setting sun, the three children heard an approaching engine, and the Jeep pulled up. A large canoe was strapped to the roof of the Jeep, and the back seat was piled with Monty's purchases. Uncle Monty got out, struggling under the weight of several shopping bags, and saw the children through the glass walls of the Reptile Room. He smiled at them. They smiled back, and in that instant, when they smiled, was created another moment of regret for them. They had not paused to smile at Monty, but instead gone dashing out to the car. They might have found a brief moment alone with him, but by the time they reached the entry hall, he was already talking to Stefano. I don't know what kind of toothbrush you preferred, Uncle Monty was saying apologetically, so I got one with extra firm bristles, because that's the kind I like. Peruvian food tends to be sticky, so you need to have at least one extra toothbrush whenever you go there. Extra firm bristles are fine with me, Stefano said, speaking to Uncle Monty, but looking at the orphans with his shiny, shiny eyes. Shall I carry in the canoe? Yes, but my goodness, you can't carry it all by yourself, Uncle Monty said. Claus, please help Stefano, will you? Uncle Monty, Violet said, we have something very important to tell you. I'm all ears, Uncle Monty said. But first let me show you the wasp repellent I picked up. I'm so glad Claus read up on the insect situation in Peru, because the other repellents I had would have been no use at all. Uncle Monty rooted through one of the bags on his arm as the children waited impatiently for him to finish. This one contains a chemical called... Uncle Monty, Claus said, what we have to tell you really can't wait. Claus, Uncle Monty said, his eyebrows rising in surprise, it's not polite to interrupt when your uncle is talking. Now please help Stefano with the canoe, and we'll talk about anything you want in a few moments. Claus sighed, but followed Stefano out the open door. Violet watched them walking toward the jeep as Uncle Monty put down the shopping bags and faced her. "I can't remember what I was saying about the repellent," he said, a little crossly. "I hate losing my train of thought." "What we have to tell you," Violet began, but she stopped when something caught her eye. Monty was facing away from the door, so he couldn't see what Stefano was doing, but Violet saw Stefano stop at the snake-shaped hedges, reach into his coat pocket, and take out the long knife. Its blade cut the light of the setting sun, and it glowed brightly like a lighthouse. As you probably know, lighthouses serve as warning signals, telling ships where the shore is so they don't run into it. The shining knife was a warning, too. Claus looked at the knife, and then at Stefano, and then at Violet. Violet looked at Claus, and then at Stefano, and then at Mommy. Sonny looked at everyone. Only Monty didn't notice what was going on. So intent was he on remembering whatever he was babbling about wasp repellent. "What we have to tell you," Violet began again, but she couldn't continue. Stefano didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Violet knew that if she breathed one word about his true identity, Stefano would hurt her brother right there at the snake-shaped hedges. Without saying a word, the nemesis of the Baudelaire orphans had sent a very clear warning. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. That night felt like the longest and most terrible the Baudelaire orphans had ever had, and they had plenty. There was one night, shortly after Sonny was born, that all their children had a horrible flu, and tossed and turned in the grasp of a terrible fever, while their father tried to soothe them all at once, placing cold washcloths on their sweaty brows. That night, after their parents had been killed, 3 children had stayed at Mr. Poe's house, and had stayed up all night, too miserable and confused to even try to sleep. And of course, they had spent many and long and terrible nights while living with the Count Olaf. But this particular night seemed worse. From the moment of Monty's arrival until bedtime, Stefano kept the children under his constant surveillance, a phrase which here means kept watching them so they couldn't possibly talk to Uncle Monty alone and reveal that he was really Count Olaf, and Uncle Monty was too preoccupied to think anything unusual was going on. When they brought in the rest of Uncle Monty's purchases, Stefano carried bags with only one hand, keeping the other one in his coat pocket where the long knife was hidden. But Uncle Monty was too excited about all the new supplies to ask about it. When they went into the kitchen to prepare dinner, Stefano smiled menacingly at the children as he sliced mushrooms, but Uncle Monty was too busy making sure the stroganoff sauce didn't boil to even notice that Stefano was using his own threatening knife for the chopping. Over dinner, Stefano told funny stories and praised Monty's scientific work, and Uncle Monty was so flattered he didn't even think to guess that Stefano was holding a knife under the table, rubbing the blade gently against Violet's knee for the entire meal. And when Uncle Monty announced that he would spend the evening showing his new assistant around the Reptile Room, he was too eager to realize that the Baudelaires simply went to bed without a word. For the first time, having the individual bedrooms seemed like a hardship rather than a luxury, for without one another's company, the orphans felt even more lonely and helpless. Violet stared at the paper tacked to her wall and tried to imagine what Stefano was planning. Claus sat in his large cushioned chair and turned on his brass reading lamp, but was too weary to even open a book. Sonny stared at her hard objects, but didn't bite a single one of them. All 3 children thought of walking down the hall to Uncle Monty's room and waking him up to tell him what was wrong. But to get to his bedroom, they would have to walk past the room in which Stefano was staying, and all night long, Stefano kept watch in a chair placed in front of his open door. When the orphans opened their doors to peer down the dark hallway, they saw Stefano's pale, shaved head, which seemed to be floating above his body in the darkness. And they could see his knife, which Stefano was moving slowly like a pendulum of a grandfather clock. Back and forth it went, back and forth, glinting in the dim light, and the sight was so fearsome they didn't dare try walking down the hallway. Finally, the light in the house turned the pale blue-gray of early dawn, and the Baudelaire children walked blearily down the stairs to breakfast. Tired and achy from their sleepless night, they sat around the table where they had eaten cake on their first morning at the house, and picked listlessly at their food. For the first time since their arrival at Uncle Monty's, they were not eager to enter the Reptile Room and begin the day's work. "I suppose we have to go in now," Violet said, finally, putting aside her scarcely nibbled toast. I'm sure Uncle Monty has already started working and is expecting us. And I'm sure that Stefano is there too, Claus said, staring glumly into his cereal bowl. We'll never get a chance to tell Uncle Monty what we know about him. Yinga, Sunny said, sadly dropping her untouched raw carrot on the floor. If Uncle Monty knew what we know, Violet said, if Stefano knew that what he knew, and Stefano knew that he knew what we know. But Uncle Monty doesn't know what we know, and Stefano knows that he doesn't know what we know. I know, Klaus said. I know you know, Violet said. But what we don't know is that Stefano is really up to. He's after our fortune, certainly. But how can he get it if we're under Uncle Monty's care? Maybe he's just going to wait until you're of age and then steal the fortune, Klaus said. 4 years is a long time to wait, Violet said. The three orphans were quiet as each remembered where they had been 4 years ago. But Violet had been 10 and had worn her hair very short. She remembered that sometime around her 10th birthday she had invented a new kind of pencil sharpener. Claus had been about 8, and he remembered how interested he had been in comets, reading all the astronomy books his parents had in their library. Sunny, of course, had not been born 4 years ago. She sat and tried to remember what it was like. Very dark, she thought, with nothing to bite. For all three youngsters, 4 years did not seem like a very long time. Come on. You are moving very slowly this morning, Uncle Monty said, bursting into the room. His face seemed even brighter than usual, and he was holding a small bunch of folded papers in one hand. Stefano has only worked here 1 day, and he's already in the Reptile Room. In fact, he was up before I was. I ran into him on my way downstairs. He's an eager beaver. But you three, you're moving like the Hungarian sloth snake, whose top speed is half an inch per hour. We have lots to do today, and I'd like to catch the 6 o'clock showing of Zombies in the Snow tonight. So let's try to hurry. Violet looked at Uncle Monty and realized that this might have been their only opportunity to talk to him alone, without Stefano around, but he seemed so wound up. They weren't sure if he would listen to them. Speaking of Stefano, she said timidly, we'd like to talk to you about him. Uncle Monty's eyes widened, and he looked around him as if there were spies in the room before leaning in to whisper to the children. I'd like to talk to you too, he said. I have my suspicions about Stefano, and I'd like to discuss them with you. The both orphans looked at one another in relief. You do? Claus said. Of course, Uncle Monty said. Last night, I began to get very suspicious about this new assistant of mine. There's something a little spooky about him, and Uncle Monty looked around again, and began speaking even softer, so that the children had to hold their breaths to hear him. I think we should discuss it outside, shall we? The children nodded in agreement and rose from the table, leaving their dirty dishes behind, which is not a good thing to do in general, but perfectly acceptable in the face of an emergency. They walked with Uncle Monty to the front entryway, past the painting of the two snakes entwined together, out the front door, and onto the lawn as if they wanted to talk to the snake-shaped hedges instead of to one another. I don't mean to be vainglorious, Uncle Monty began, using a word which here means braggy, but I really am one of the most widely respected herpetologists in the world. Klaus blinked. That was an unexpected beginning for the conversation. Of course you are, he said, and because of this, I am sad to say, Uncle Monty continued, as if he had not heard, many people are jealous of me. I'm sure that's true, Violet said, puzzled. And when people are jealous, Uncle Monty said, shaking his head, they will do anything. They will do crazy things. When I was getting my herpetology degree, my roommate was so envious of a new toad I had discovered that he stole and ate my only specimen. I had to x-ray his stomach and use the x-rays rather than the toad in the presentation, and something tells me we may have a similar situation here. What was Uncle Monty talking about? I'm afraid I don't quite follow you, Klaus said, which is the polite way of saying, what are you talking about, Uncle Monty? Last night, after you went to bed, Stefano asked me too many questions about all the snakes and my upcoming expedition. And do you know why? I think so, Violet began, but Uncle Monty interrupted her. It is because this man, who is calling himself Stefano, he said, is really a member of the Herpetological Society, and he is here to find the incredibly deadly viper so he can preempt my presentation. Do you three know what the word preempt means? No, Violet said, but it means that I think this Stefano is going to steal my snake, Uncle Monty said, and present it to the Herpetological Society because it is a new species. There's no way I can prove I discovered it. Before we know it, the incredibly deadly viper will be called Stefano Snake, or something dreadful like that. And if he's planning that, just think what he will do to our Peruvian expedition. Each toad we catch, each venomous sample we put in a test tube, each snake interview we record, every scrap of work we'll do, will fall into the hands of this Herpetological Society spy. That's a hard word for me. He's not a herpetological spy, Claus said impatiently. He's Count Olaf. I know just what you mean, Uncle Monty said excitedly. This sort of behavior is indeed as dastardly as that terrible man's. This is why I'm doing this. He raised one hand and waved the folded papers in the air. As you know, he said, tomorrow we are leaving for Peru. These are our tickets for the 5 o'clock voyage on the Prospero, a fine ship that will take us across the sea to South America. There's a ticket for me, one for Violet, one for Klaus, one for Stefano, but not one for Sunny because we're going to hide her in a suitcase to save money. Deeple! I'm kidding about that, but I'm not kidding about this. Uncle Monty, his face flushed with excitement, took one of the folded papers and began ripping it into tiny pieces. This is Stefano's ticket. He's not going to Peru with us after all. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to tell him that he needs to stay here and look after my specimens instead. That way we can run a successful expedition in peace. But Uncle Monty, Klaus said, how many times must I remind you it's not polite to interrupt? Uncle Monty interrupted, shaking his head. In any case, I know what you're worried about. You're worried what will happen if he stays here alone with the incredibly deadly viper. But don't worry, the viper will join us on the expedition, traveling in one of our snake-carrying cases. I don't know why you're looking so glum, Sonny. I thought you'd be happy to have the viper's company. So don't look so worried, Bambini. As you can see, your Uncle Monty has the situation in hand. When somebody is a little bit wrong, say when a waiter puts non-fat milk in your special macchiato instead of low-fat milk, it is often quite easy to explain to them how and why they are wrong. But if someone is surprisingly wrong, say when a waiter bites your nose instead of taking your order, you can often be so surprised that you are unable to say anything at all. Paralyzed by how wrong the waiter is, your mouth would hang slightly open and your eyes would blink over and over. But you would be unable to say a word. This is what the Baudelaire children did. Uncle Monty was so wrong about Stefano in thinking he was a herpetological spy rather than Count Olaf that the 3 siblings could scarcely think of a way to tell him so. Come on now, my dears, Uncle Monty said. We've wasted enough of the morning on talk. We've got to... Ow! He interrupted himself with a cry of surprise and pain and fell to the ground. Uncle Monty, Klaus cried. The Baudelaire children saw that a large shiny object was on top of him and realized a moment later what the object was. It was the heavy brass reading lamp, the one standing next to the large cushioned chair in Klaus's room. Ow! Monty said again, pulling the lamp off him. That really hurt. My shoulder may be sprained. It's a good thing it didn't land on my head, or it really could have done some damage. But where did it come from? Violet asked. It must have fallen from the window, Uncle Monty said, pointing to where Klaus's room was. Whose room is that? Klaus, I believe it's yours. You must be more careful. You can't dangle heavy objects out the window like that. Look what almost happened. But that lamp wasn't near my window, Klaus said. I keep it in the alcove so I can read in that large chair. Really, Klaus, Uncle Monty said, standing up and handing him the lamp. Do you honestly expect me to believe that the lamp danced over to the window and leaped onto my shoulder? Please, put this back in your room in a safe place, and we'll say no more about it. But, Klaus said, but his older sister interrupted him. I'll help you, Klaus, Violet said. We'll find a safe place for it where it's safe. Well, don't be too long, Uncle Monty said, rubbing his shoulder. We'll see you in the reptile room. Come, Sonny. Walking through the entry hall, the 4 parted ways of the stairs, and Uncle Monty and Sonny going to the enormous door of the reptile room, and Violet and Klaus carrying the heavy brass lamp up to Klaus's room. You know very well, Klaus hissed to his sister, that I was not careless with this lamp. Of course I know that, Violet whispered, but there's no use trying to explain that to Uncle Monty. He thinks Stefano is a herpetological spy. You know as well as I do that Stefano was responsible for this. How clever of you to figure this out, said a voice at the top of the stairs, and Violet and Claus were so surprised they almost dropped the lamp. It was Stefano, or, if you prefer, it was Count Olaf. It was the bad guy. But then you've always been clever, children, he continued. A little too clever for my taste, but we won't be around for long, so I'm not troubled by it. You're not very clever yourself, Claus said fiercely. This heavy brass lamp almost hit us, but if anything happens to my sister or me, you'll never get your hands on the bottle of our fortune. Dear me, Stefano said, his grimy teeth showing as he smiled. If I wanted to harm you, orphan, your blood would already be pouring down these stairs like a waterfall. No, I'm not going to harm a hair on any bottle or head. Not here in this house. If you needn't be afraid of me, little ones, until we find ourselves in a location where crimes are more difficult to trace. And where would that be? Violet asked. We plan to stay right here until we grow up. Really? Stefano said in a sneaky voice. Why, I had the impression we were leaving the country tomorrow. Uncle Monty tore up your ticket, Claus replied triumphantly. He was suspicious of you, so he changed his plans, and now you're not going with us. Stefano's smile turned into a scowl, and his stained teeth seemed to grow bigger. His eyes were so shiny that it hurt Violet and Claus to look at them. I wouldn't rely on that, he said in a terrible voice. Even the best plans can change if there's an accident. He pointed one spiky finger at the brass reading lamp, and accidents happen all the time. Chapter 6, next time.